By his own account, he must have lived his life among some of the wickedest men that God ever allowed upon the sea, and the language in which he told these stories shocked our plain country people almost as much as the crimes that he described. The valley was bright when Greybeard awoke. He could hear the distant calls of birds, but not the sound of the seagulls that he usually heard on his ship. It was the chirps and tweets of swallows, terns, and thrushes. The campfire was black and smouldering. Eye Patch was quickly up and about business, putting various pots, lanterns, and other pieces of equipment into the carry sacks. The giant was still asleep. His loud snores resonated along the floor of the valley. With the aid of the tree-branch walking stick, Greybeard got to his feet and then took out his spyglass to scan the far side. He saw hills in the very distance, more rocky areas along the floor of the valley, but also a prominent ridge on the southern side. It looked like bracken, and several saplings covered the ridge, which meant there must be soil. The only way mineral-enriched dirt would be in an otherwise barren, rocky valley is if someone had put it there. Maybe someone had dug the earth out to form the ridge itself. The mine. "I think I've found the blasted mine," he exclaimed. "Come on, gather our things. We can make it there before the noon sun is upon us, if we don't waste any time." Eye Patch already had his gear packed, and he kicked the giant in his back. "Get up, you lummox!" he shouted, and the giant awoke, looking annoyed. Begrudgingly, he arose and slowly began packing. Within the hour, the trio were making their way westward, toward the ridge that Greybeard had spotted. The giant was lagging behind somewhat, while complaining about how heavy his hammer felt that morning. He put it down a poor night's rest, and how little he'd eaten. But Greybeard paid no heed. So keen was he to finally find the mine and the treasure hidden within it. They kept up a brisk pace, and by the time the ridge was less than 100 steps away, Greybeard discarded his tree branch, as it seemed to be slowing him down more than helping. "Look over there," he said, pointing to an area of the valley floor where he could see bits of old planks and rusted tools strewn around. When they got to the other side of the ridge, they saw the wooden posts, slats, and struts that surrounded a large hole in the ridge face. "Finally!" Greybeard exclaimed. Both Eye Patch and the giant gave cries of celebration before complaining of being hungry again. They spent the next hour eating, drinking grog, and sorting out the gear they would need to take with them into the mine. Lamps, rope, shovels, sacks to carry the treasure in, and some rations in case they were underground for a while. Eye Patch also insisted on bringing a bottle of rum to keep him warm. Once their preparations were complete, the three men stood at the entrance and peered into the tunnel ahead of them. Eye Patch already had a lantern lit, and he held it over the map as Greybeard gave it one last inspection before venturing forth. "Stick close to me, men. We don't know exactly how deep this mine goes, and I don't want you wandering off," Greybeard instructed them while scanning the map. There was writing above the drawing of the mine that read, "Deepest level, and X marks the spot." He examined the words a final time, rolled up the map, and stuffed it into his waist belt. Taking one last look around the valley, he drew in a breath and tried to sound as confident as possible. "Come on!" And he walked into the darkness. Eye Patch and the giant followed him, close behind. The mine was slick with groundwater. It ran down from the ceiling and pooled into the many crevices and cracks on the floor. It nurtured moss and lichen, as well as the rats and other things that scurried about unseen. The lanterns they carried could only penetrate the darkness to a limited extent, so progress was slow and precarious, as the stability of their footing was far from assured. The giant had unrolled his huge length of rope, and each man had tied it around their waist as a precaution. He was at the back, Eye Patch was in the middle, and Greybeard at the front. "I think I see 2 tunnels ahead," Greybeard said, straining his eyes in the dim light. "What say you, left or right?" he asked. Eye Patch coughed and dribbled some spittle as he responded, "I say keep to the right." "Yeah, the right sounds good," the giant agreed. Greybeard looked from left to right to left, then right again, almost like he hadn't decided which route to take, regardless of the other's suggestion. Both tunnels looked similar. No distinguishing features, save for the one on the left, had signs of a partial cave-in. The mine was so damp, the wooden slats and posts smelled of rotting oak and chestnut wood. Moss covered most of the visible beams, and the occasional tool lay rusting on the floor or propped up against a wall. There was nothing to deduce the best route to take, so Greybeard decided to go with his men's suggestion, and they headed to the right. In this new tunnel, the giant started complaining after he hit his head on a ceiling beam, and he had to crouch slightly to avoid hitting his head again. He'd lost his tricorn hat too, but the captain refused to stop so they could look for it. He said that they could retrieve it on the return journey. As they traveled deeper, the lanterns illuminated more of the tunnel than before. Greybeard put it down to the rock being a majority of iron or copper, rather than the dull earthen stone that comprised the mine nearer its entrance. He wondered just how deep it went. The floor had been consistently sloping down several degrees, and at this point it was almost a steep 30 degrees. It was wetter, too. Footsteps had become increasingly precarious. The tunnel floor offered more cracks and loose rocks to trip over or twist an ankle. After an hour or so, their cumbersome movement had become exhausting, and the first real seeds of doubt and regret were planted in Greybeard's mind. Wise men wouldn't venture into long-abandoned mines, and wise men wouldn't sail 300 leagues chasing the wild claims of a desperate sailor. "You me feet are sopping wet," grumbled the giant. Greybeard's feet were wet too. The water ran down the tunnel in greater volume the further they travelled, and they made nervous talk of the mine possibly being flooded. They decided, after much discussion, that they would continue forward unless the water became more than ankle deep. Flooded mines were more likely to collapse, and no amount of treasure was worth being buried alive in the dark for. At some point, Greybeard could hear running water, and sounds developed a quiet echo. The area ahead of him produced splashing and bubbling noises. The louder those sounds got, the more pronounced the echoes, and soon the air contained motion in the form of a light breeze. "I think this tunnel is leading us to an underground river," Greybeard exclaimed. "You can hear it, and there's air flowing through." Eye Patch raised his lantern up in front of him to help him see ahead better. "I hope it ain't deep. Me feet are bloody freezing already," he whined. "Let's just get there and see what's what," Greybeard said. "It could be shallow enough to wade through. We have enough dry sticks and lamp oil to build a fire and dry ourselves on the other side." "I suppose," Eye Patch begrudgingly agreed. Advancing forward at a quickened pace, the sloping tunnel opened up into a huge chasm. It was filled with echoes, and the bubbling river water had become white noise. Eye Patch had picked up a rock and threw it across the river into the darkness with all the force he could muster. A second later, a deep and distinct splash was heard, followed by several fainter splashes as the sound bounced around the cave walls. "Curses!" he exclaimed. "Looks like we're gonna have to swim it, Cap'n." Greybeard thought for a moment before replying. "Very well, but one of us will have to swim across first and find the riverbank on the other side." He unfastened the rope from around his waist and continued, "We'll tie this around the volunteer, and we can pull them back if needed." Holding up the rope, Greybeard looked at the giant, then Eye Patch, and back to the giant again. "Which one of you is volunteering?" he asked. Eye Patch took a step back and looked at the giant with a sly grin on his face. The giant sighed. "Can't we go back and try going down the other tunnel?" "No," Greybeard snapped. "We've come too far this way. Now hand your lantern over and prepare yourself for a swim." After much maneuvering, cajoling, and contorting, a disgruntled giant was fitted with a makeshift harness fashioned from rope. Eye Patch filled one of the waterproof animal skin sacks with a lantern and some kindle and tied it atop the harness. With a few encouraging words and several shoves, the giant slowly waded out into the cold black water. "It's bloody freezing," he exclaimed, as he got far enough out that the water was up to his waist, and after a deep breath he began to swim out into the blackness. Greybeard and Eye Patch allowed the rope to spool out through their hands, taking up any slack until the rope was taut. Splishes and splashes echoed around the cave, growing fainter as the giant disappeared from sight. Occasionally, a complaint about how cold the water was would echo around the cave, but then those sounds grew fainter. The splashing grew fainter too. Soon the rope was almost at full length, and Greybeard and Eye Patch were forced to take several steps into the river so as not to lose the rope altogether. "This bleedin' river must be 100 feet wide," said Eye Patch. Greybeard gripped the rope even tighter. "We'll have to let go if it is. We can't all be dragged into the unknown." The thought sent a shiver down his spine. Eye Patch began to panic as the rope was now pulling them knee-deep into the water. They were going to have to make a decision soon. Let the rope go and hope for the best, or to hell with it and start swimming themselves. "What's it to be, Cap'n?" Eye Patch asked, a quiver in his voice betraying any mask of bravado. "Hold just a little longer now," Greybeard responded, feeling the cool river water begin lapping above his knees. Each moment seemed a terrible eternity as both men peered into the dark in front of them as they made one, then two, then three more steps forward into the river. Greybeard scrambled to make a decision. The water was up to their groins now, and the rope was still taut. With a deep sense of regret, he knew what he had to do, and his hands loosened their grip a little as he began to audibly make the call. Greybeard did not complete his sentence as the pulling of the rope abruptly ended, and it began to hang slack. "Should we start pulling the rope?" Eye Patch asked. "Wait!" Greybeard responded sharply. He scanned the darkness on the far side of the river, looking for a sign, and there it was, the faint and distant glow of a lantern, with the outline of an exhausted giant crouched next to it. Greybeard let out a quiet sigh of relief, and tried to sound confident as he spoke. "Excellent. Well, come along. Let's get the rest of the equipment across."